The grand hall of the Westbridge Global Finance Summit was glowing under crystal chandeliers. Every corner of the venue screamed power. Billionaire investors, global CEOs, luxury brand owners, and political influencers sitting in perfectly arranged rows of authority. It was not just an event. It was a battlefield of status. At the center table sat Richard Kane, one of the most respected black CEOs in the corporate world. Calm, controlled, silent. His dark tailored suit, white shirt, and composed posture made him stand out without effort. People didn't just respect him, they calculated him. Beside him sat his daughter, Amara Kane, young, elegant, soft-spoken, dressed in a simple but graceful black dress that didn't scream wealth but carried dignity. She wasn't used to these rooms, but she belonged here because of him. Across the same hall, laughter broke out from another table. A group of young elite guests, mostly heirs of billionaire families, were seated together, sipping champagne, enjoying attention, and among them was Victoria Hale, the daughter of a global billionaire industrialist, blonde, expensively dressed, confident in a way that came from never being told no. She leaned slightly toward her friends, eyes locking onto Amara, then she smiled, not warmly, mockingly. "She looks lost," Victoria whispered, loud enough for the nearby table to hear. A few of her friends laughed. Amara heard it. She paused for a moment but said nothing. She lowered her gaze, trying to stay composed, but Victoria wasn't finished. She stood up slightly from her seat, holding her glass of champagne. "Oh wait," she said casually, now fully looking at Amara. "Are you sure you're in the right section? This is for investors, not guests." A few people around her chuckled. The insult was public now, sharp, intentional. Amara's fingers tightened slightly on her glass, but she stayed quiet. Across the table, Richard Kane noticed immediately. His eyes lifted slowly, but he didn't react yet. He was watching, not the insult, but the environment. Amara finally spoke softly. "I'm here with my father." Victoria tilted her head. "Oh," she smiled. "That explains it." A pause. Then she added, "So basically, you're just here because of him." That sentence hit harder. A few people at nearby tables stopped talking. The atmosphere shifted slightly. Amara didn't respond, but her eyes lowered, not in defeat, but in restraint. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. But Victoria now felt empowered by the silence. She walked a few steps closer to their table. Slowly, deliberately, her friends followed behind her like an audience. She looked at Richard Kane briefly, then back at Amara. "You know," she said softly, "people like you shouldn't feel embarrassed being here." A fake smile, a pause, then the twist. "It's just not really your world." Silence fell for half a second. Even background conversations softened. Amara finally looked up. Her voice was calm. "I didn't come here to compete with anyone. That should have ended it." But Victoria smiled wider. "Of course you didn't." A small laugh. Then she turned slightly toward her friends. "And that's exactly why people like her stay invisible in rooms like this." That was the breaking point in the air. The insult wasn't just personal anymore. It was structural, a statement about belonging. Across the table, Richard Kane slowly placed his glass down. Not loudly, not dramatically, just precisely. His expression didn't change. But something in the room shifted instantly. The executives nearby noticed it first. A subtle silence, a pause in movement, a recalibration of energy. Victoria didn't notice yet. She was still smiling, still enjoying the moment, still unaware of the storm she had just stepped into. Richard Kane looked at his daughter. Amara avoided eye contact, not because she was weak, but because she didn't want escalation. Then Richard leaned slightly forward and quietly said, "Amara," just her name, nothing else. But that single moment changed everything. Because across the hall, 3 executives suddenly stopped mid-conversation. One of them checked his phone. His face changed instantly. "Wait," he whispered. Another executive leaned in. "What?" The first one replied in shock. "The Kane Hole $750 million partnership." A pause. It just went into emergency review status. The silence that followed Richard Kane's single word, "Amara," was not loud, but it was heavy, like pressure building inside a sealed room. Across the hall, Victoria Hale was still smiling, unaware that something had shifted beyond visible perception. She took another sip of champagne, completely relaxed. Her friends leaned in, amused. "She didn't even respond," one of them whispered. Victoria chuckled. Of course she didn't. People like that never do. She turned slightly again toward Amara. This is why you don't belong in rooms like this, she said casually, voice soft but sharp enough for nearby tables to hear. A few executives frowned slightly, not because of sympathy, but because of recognitions. They understood what kind of line had just been crossed. Amara's hands tightened under the table, but she stayed silent. Not out of fear, out of restraint. Across from her, Richard Kane finally moved, slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks. Then he looked toward the far end of the hall, not at Victoria, but at the room itself, and that's when it started. A subtle vibration in the atmosphere. At the executive table, a man's phone lit up, then another, then another. Within seconds, multiple senior executives began checking messages. Confusion turned into concern. Concern turned into alarm. One of them leaned forward. The 750M agreement file just got flagged, he said quietly. Another executive frowned. What kind of flag? The reply came instantly. Executive override review, initiated by Kane Holdings. A pause. That name changed everything. Victoria was still laughing softly with her friends when she noticed movement in the room. Executives weren't talking anymore. They were reading, typing, standing slightly. The mood had shifted, but she still didn't understand why. She turned back to Amara. You know, she said, voice louder now, it's actually kind of impressive that your father even got invited here. A few of her friends laughed again, but weaker this time. Because even they felt something was wrong. Amara finally looked up. This time, her voice was steady. I didn't ask to be invited. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Oh, Amara continued calmly. And I didn't come here for validation. A pause. Then softer. I came because my father is closing a deal here. Victoria smirked. Right. The $750 million fantasy deal everyone's pretending matters. That was the exact moment the room changed temperature. At the executive table, one man stood up abruptly. His chair scraped the floor. All eyes turned. He stared at his tablet. His face had gone pale. It's not a review, he said slowly. Silence fell. He continued. The Kane side has triggered full suspension protocol. Another executive stood. No, that's not possible without board confirmation. The first interrupted him. It's already done. A pause. Then the final blow. The $750 million deal is frozen. Across the hall, Victoria heard the word frozen. She frowned. What does that mean? She whispered to one of her friends, but no one answered immediately. Because now the executives were moving faster. Calls were being made. Security staff were quietly stepping toward exits. Legal advisors were pulled aside, and at the center of it all, Richard Kane was still sitting, calm, composed, watching. Victoria finally noticed. Her smile faded slightly. Why is everyone acting weird? She muttered. One of her friends replied quietly. I think something just happened. Victoria scoffed. What could possibly happen in 5 minutes? But as she turned back, she saw something that erased her confidence instantly. An executive was standing near her table, looking directly at her, not angrily, not loudly, just professionally cold. And he said one sentence, Miss Hale, you may want to sit down. The words from the executive hit the air like a silent explosion. Miss Hale, you may want to sit down. Victoria Hale blinked. For the first time that evening, her smile didn't come instantly. She glanced at her friends, expecting laughter, support, confusion, anything familiar, but she didn't get it. Their expressions had changed. One looked away, another checked her phone nervously. The confidence she had been surrounded by minutes ago was dissolving. Excuse me? Victoria said, still trying to maintain control of the situation. The executive didn't repeat himself. Instead, he slowly turned his tablet toward her. On the screen, 750,000 Sonum, frozen, initiated by Kane Holdings. Victoria's eyes scanned the line, once, then again. Her smile faded completely. Frozen? She whispered. Across the hall, the atmosphere had completely shifted now. No more casual conversations, no more laughter. Executives were standing, assistants were whispering into phones, security personnel had subtly repositioned themselves near exits, and at the center of it all, Richard Kane still hadn't moved. He was simply watching, not Victoria, not the executives, but the system reacting to his silence. Victoria finally turned slightly toward Amara again. But this time, something in her expression was different. Uncertainty. "What did you say to your father?" she asked, her voice lower now. Amara looked at her calmly. "I didn't say anything." That answer hit harder than expected, because it meant this wasn't emotional, it was structural. Victoria's friend leaned in. "Vic, I think something serious is happening." Victoria snapped softly. "It's just a review. Deals get reviewed all the time." But even as she said it, her voice didn't sound confident anymore. Another executive walked toward her table. This time, not casually, not politely, purposefully. He stopped beside her. "Miss Hale," he said formally, "we've received an immediate directive from Kane Holdings." Victoria's throat tightened slightly. "Directive?" He nodded once. "Yes." A pause. Then, "The partnership is under suspension, pending conduct evaluation." Victoria's mind tried to process it. "Conduct," she repeated. The executive didn't hesitate. "Behavior observed during today's summit has triggered compliance reassessment." Silence. A deep one. Victoria slowly turned her head toward Amara again, this time really looking at her, not with arrogance, but with confusion. "What did I do?" she asked quietly. Amara didn't answer immediately. She just looked at her, and that silence said everything. Across the hall, another executive was speaking urgently on a call. "Yes, freeze all external communications. Do not issue press release yet. Kane approval is required before any statement." The room was moving fast now, too fast for comfort. Victoria stood slightly from her seat. "This is ridiculous," she said, voice shaking slightly now. It was just a conversation, but no one responded to her, because they weren't focused on her anymore. They were focused on him. Richard Kane finally stood up, slowly. The entire hall reacted instantly, not because he spoke, but because he moved. Executives straightened, conversations stopped, phones lowered, even security shifted subtly. He walked forward, not toward the executives, not toward Victoria, but toward his daughter. Amara looked up at him. For the first time, her expression softened slightly, not weak, relieved. Victoria watched him approach. Her mind was finally catching up. "Who is he?" she whispered, almost to herself. An executive answered quietly beside her. "The man controlling this entire deal." Victoria froze. "Controlling?" The executive nodded once. "Your $750 million agreement doesn't exist without his signature." Her breath caught slightly. "No," she whispered. But Richard Kane had already reached Amara. He didn't look at Victoria, not even once. He simply said, "Are you okay?" Amara nodded softly. Yes, that was it. No anger, no drama, just confirmation. But somehow, that was worse for Victoria, because now she understood something terrifying. She hadn't insulted a random girl. She had targeted the daughter of the only person holding the entire deal together, and he had been watching, quietly, patiently, until now. Victoria slowly sat back down. For the first time, her hands were shaking, and the deal worth $750 million was no longer collapsing in theory. It was already gone. The room no longer felt like a summit. It felt like a courtroom without a judge, because the judgment had already been made. Victoria Hale sat completely still now. No arrogance, no smile, no confidence, just silence. The kind of silence that comes after realization hits too late. Across the hall, Richard Kane stood beside his daughter Amara, his hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. Not protective in a dramatic way, but present, stable, unshakable. That presence alone told everyone in the room one thing. Nothing else mattered here anymore. The $750 million deal wasn't being debated. It wasn't being reviewed. It was already gone from the system of trust. A senior executive stepped forward carefully, voice low. "Sir, legal has confirmed full suspension of the Hale agreement. All financial pipelines have been frozen." Richard Kane nodded once. "Good." One word, no emotion, just confirmation. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. Her voice came out smaller than before. "Frozen means temporary, right?" No one answered immediately, because no one wanted to. The executive finally spoke. "Indefinite suspension pending behavioral review." Victoria blinked. "Behavioral review," she repeated. Her voice cracked slightly now. "This is insane." It was just a comment. Her friend beside her whispered nervously, "Vic, maybe stop talking." But she couldn't, because panic was replacing arrogance in real time. She turned toward Amara again. "You did this," she said suddenly, not loud, but emotional. Amara looked at her calmly. "No," she said softly, "I didn't." That calm answer destroyed Victoria more than anger ever could, because it meant one thing. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't emotion. This was structured consequence. Across the hall, executives were now moving in controlled urgency, phones vibrating, emails locked, legal teams reviewing clauses, PR teams preparing containment drafts. But nothing was being finalized, because everything still required one approval: Richard Kane's approval. A senior board member appeared on screen from a remote call. "Sir," he said carefully, "Hale Board is requesting reinstatement negotiation." Richard Kane didn't turn fully. He simply said, "Denied." Instantly. No hesitation, no debate. Victoria's breath caught. "Denied?" she whispered again. Her world was collapsing in real time now. Not emotionally, structurally. A second executive stepped forward. "Sir, financial exposure from cancellation is significant." Richard Kane turned slightly, and for the first time his voice sharpened, not louder, just firmer. "So is disrespect." Silence. That one sentence shifted everything, because now everyone understood. This was not about money. It was about hierarchy, about behavior, about consequence. Victoria slowly stood up again, but this time she wasn't confident. She was unstable. "This is because I made a comment?" she asked, voice shaking. A senior executive finally answered her directly. "Miss Hale, it was not the comment." He paused. "It was the target." Victoria froze. Across the hall, she looked at Amara again. Really looked this time. Not as competition, not as someone beneath her, but as someone connected to something she didn't understand. "Who are you?" Victoria whispered. Amara didn't respond, because she didn't need to. Richard Kane finally turned toward Victoria, for the first time, fully. His expression wasn't angry, it wasn't emotional, it was final. "Sit down," he said calmly. Just 2 words, but they carried authority that made the entire room feel smaller. Victoria slowly sat back down. Her hands were trembling now. The confidence that once filled her posture was gone completely. Across the hall, another executive spoke quietly. "Sir." "Confirmation needed for public statement handling." Richard Kane nodded slightly. "Release nothing. Pause. Let silence do the work." That line hit harder than anything else, because everyone understood what it meant. No defense, no explanation, no damage control, just consequence. Victoria whispered again, almost broken now, "My father will fix this." A nearby executive responded quietly, "No, he won't." Silence, heavy, absolute, because now it was official. The Hale family didn't control the outcome anymore. They were inside it, and losing it. Richard Kane looked at Amara again. "Let's go," he said softly. Amara stood. And just like that, she walked away from the table. Not rushed, not emotional, just calm. Behind her, the entire room stayed frozen, because no one was watching Victoria anymore. Everyone was watching the collapse of a $750 million illusion. Victoria didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react, because she finally understood. She hadn't lost an argument, she had lost access. And in her world, that was everything. As Richard Kane and his daughter walked out of the hall, the executives didn't follow. They didn't speak. They didn't try to stop it, because they all knew one truth now. The decision had already been made, and it could not be reversed. The doors closed behind them quietly. No dramatic sound. No announcement, just finality. Inside the hall, Victoria remained seated, watching the empty space they left behind. Her voice finally came out barely above a whisper, over a comment. But this time, no one answered, because the deal wasn't just collapsed. It was erased from relevance, and the lesson was already permanent. In rooms like this, you don't just lose money, you lose position,